Yeah.
So a very good evening and a warm welcome to God's Glory and Story. It's session 5 of season 3, and it's a very, very auspicious day because it is our anniversary. Uh, and I remember we had started God's Glory Story as a initiative during the pandemic, where Alok and me both felt that we should do something with our expertise in our fields to contribute during the pandemic. And I said the only thing that we can do is we can spread ideas. And both of us knew a lot of people like you, Sushilji, who are capable of spreading and giving inspiration, and that's how this started. And it's been a year. We've have a database now of subscribers. It's almost around 20,000 people have subscribed to the channel. We've had 25 plus speakers come over, and it's on 40 podcasts as we speak. And plus, we have a YouTube channel, and all our episodes are also hosted on the website. So a great day to indeed have you, Sushilji. And I was just telling you audiences as to how when we do a pre-session prior to going live on God's Glory Story, this time in our pre-event session, we could not finish absorbing all the stories in one session. So we caught up again on another day because the stories were not ending and our learning was not ending, and the thirst to absorb more was not ending. And we are making a special this time because there was so much to learn, there was so much to absorb that this session is going to be a 75-minute session. It's going to extend a little extra because trust me, there are so many stories that Sushil has. For those of you who may not be knowing us, who might be tuning in for the first time, I am Sangram Surve. I'm a co-host on the show. I am a serial entrepreneur. I run a couple of companies in the advertising and media space. I've also produced a movie which is there on Netflix. It's called Cycle. Um, and with me is my illustrious co-host Alok Sinha, who's also a serial CEO, serial entrepreneur, and investor, and is author now. And his first book, Achieving Successful Business Outcomes, is out in the market. And I must thank Alok because it is thanks to Alok that Sushil is on this channel. And to formally introduce him, I'm going to hand it over to Alok. Alok, all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sangram. And welcome, Sushil, to Guts, Glory, and Story.
Thank you.
To the viewers, we are truly delighted to welcome you on the first anniversary telecast today. And remember, last year we began with Praveer Sinha, who's the MD and CEO of Tata Power. And what a coincidence that exactly a year later, we have another icon, a great icon, who has green solar power as one of his portfolio companies. And that's the reason why we called this episode as Empowering the Unpowered, but there is much more. And this part is just a small part of what he does. So, Sushil, let's traverse through the journey of your incredible life and achievements, what you have achieved so far. So, here is my first question for you.
Yeah.
When you turned 60, you decided to celebrate your birthday in a very unique way by putting forth a social conscience. And by the way, I'm leaving this part for you to answer in my last question. But obviously, your childhood had a very deep bearing on why you choose why you chose to do what you're doing. Also, I remember you telling me music influenced you a lot. So tell us more about how your childhood left such a deep impact on what you're doing today.
Well, first
Sushil.
of all, thank you, Alok and Sangram. It's a delight to be on your show, especially on a momentous day where you're celebrating your first anniversary and that we are going to be entering the 75th year of our independence. So that makes it even more special. And to join a galaxy of great speakers and great achievers uh, is an honor for me. So thank you very much for that. So let me begin from my early childhood. I was born in Calcutta, and we were a middle class family, lived in a single room apartment with 8 people. You know, my parents and 6 siblings living in a single room, and faced a lot of challenges during that time. Fortunately for me, I was blessed that at the age of 5, My father decided to move to Bombay to accept a challenge that was thrown at him. And so three siblings and my parents, we moved to Mumbai. Now, my story can't begin without telling you about my father, who has been more than a father. He was my mentor, guide, friend, philosopher. I don't know. Uh, Anything that I can say about him will be less. So, we studied till the sixth standard, then he was bedridden for 6 years, and then at the age of 14, started his own business in textile broking, and from there, tried his hand at multiple things, and then, as fate would have it, he ultimately landed up in electronics and was ultimately called the Bhishma Pitama of the electronic industry. So, very briefly, I'll share that story. He had imported 20,000 valve radios, which used to be imported from UK, and those turned out to be defective. And so he had to get a stay order from the Calcutta High Court, went to London, met with them, got a free replacement, and they said the original ones could be thrown in the sea. And then there was a French marine radio engineer who had come on a ship to Calcutta and was going to stay there for 9 months. And when my father narrated him this story, he said, can I have a look at these radios? So he said, sure, and when he came, uh, he found that one of the components was loosely soldered, and then it would take 5 minutes to get one radio um, back to working condition. And so, what would have made my father bankrupt, suddenly gave him such a massive profit because he started a company in 1949 called Janta Radios Private Limited to repair those radios which he had got for free now. And he hired this French guy as his general manager. And so he felt, that destiny wants him to pursue this path. So he then went around the world, to Germany, Japan, etc., signed up with all the major component manufacturers and started importing electronic components in the country, and soon became the largest importer of components. So virtually everyone in the electronics industry across the country knew him very well. He used to dress and speak more like a Bengali Babu. Um so in 1960, there was a company called Telerad Radios in Bombay, which had gone bankrupt. And the promoters, a Parsi and a Gujarati gentleman, they requested my father if he could shift to Bombay, take over the reins, and get it back to good health. And my father was always up for any challenge. Nothing was too daunting for him, and he said, "Yes, let's go." So imagine, leaving half his family back in Calcutta, moving to Bombay, and saying, "Yes, let's take it on." And then within 2 years, he had not only nursed it to health, but it became the fastest growing radio company in India. And he had an amazing ability because of his humility and because he didn't have a proper education background. He went to all the competitors and said, well, can you show me your production floor? And he would ask questions in a very humble way, little realizing that he had such a photographic memory that he had studied what were the pain points in Telerad and was able to solve them by seeing how the production was being managed in the competitor factories. And he always believed that while in business you can be competitors, it does not mean that you are enemies. And so all these competitors were very close friends of his. Bush, Murphy, Nelco, Phillips, the owners and CEOs became very close friends of his. And he soon earned so much respect that they made him the president of the association, which was called RETMA at that time. And soon his influence kept growing. And then in 1967, he was given the first TV manufacturing license in India. So in that period, I was experiencing a lot of physical challenges. The water used to come for 20 minutes. Electricity would go off any time. And since I was the only male member at home, even though I was a kid, I was doing a lot of domestic chores, which kept me more busy and did not allow me to spend adequate amount of time on my studies. And that led to at least two teachers, one in the fourth standard and one in the eighth standard, telling me that I don't have much of a future because I just don't have those capabilities. So that could have been, you know, very shocking and could have led me into depression. But somehow I steeled myself with a firm resolution that one day I'm going to prove both these ladies wrong. And
Shilji, if you can come up a little closer because a lot of people are saying they can't hear you.
okay, sure. Now is it better?
Yes, a little better. Yeah.
Okay. So I determined that I have to prove myself, and maybe if I had not received this adverse feedback from my these two teachers, I wouldn't be where I am today. So that became one major influence in my life. The second thing was I, right from my childhood, I've been very sensitive to the less fortunate, the poor, the needy, and I was always known, even from my childhood, as a guy who was willing to help out others, and that endeared me to everyone. You know, whether it was at home, in school, with the teachers, with my classmates, etc. And I realized that this is one quality that I have, which is going to take me further in life. So when I did join college, you'll be surprised to know my first choice was to become a social worker. My second choice was to become a singer, and I had no interest in joining business. But as soon as I joined college, my elder brother came from Delhi and he said, "You have to join from tomorrow. You have to come to the office." And I said, "I have no interest. I'm joining social work." And we were having a heated discussion, and my father came and said, "Why are you arguing?" So he closed the room and he said, "Okay, you don't want to go. You should not go. But you answer a few questions." So he said, "If there is a fire in the house and there is a fire in the neighborhood, which one will you douse first?" So promptly I said, the house. So he asked why. I said, well, if I don't have a house, I lose the ability to go and help anybody else. So he said, "That's absolutely right." And doing good for society is a very noble thought in your mind, and it can only be appreciated. But you have a duty to your family, a duty to your immediate neighborhood, and then a duty to the larger society. And if you fulfill them in this order, then uh, you would have fulfilled all your duties. The second thing he said was that as an individual, you can impact 100, 200 people. But if you have a desire to impact millions of people, then as an individual, you will never be able to achieve your dream in this lifetime. So even if you join business, do it as a trustee of society. When you provide jobs, it is a sustainable way of helping society. And the wealth that you earn, you treat it as a wealth on behalf of the society and use it for good causes rather than spending it on yourself. And that had a very deep impact on my mind. And of course, I joined the business on the very next day. But it was set in my mind that I am going to use various platforms that life will throw at me to do good for society. So those were incidents, that shaped my mind. When I was in college, I joined the National Service Scheme, and I did blood donation, eye donation camps. I was teaching at the blind school, at the Fellowship for the Physically Handicapped. I worked for the juvenile delinquents, and we had adopted a poorest village in Maharashtra at that time called Kosbad near Dahanu. And I was so impacted by one incident. We had put in our pocket money, we were about 150 of us, and bought some seeds and given it to an 80-year-old farmer. And we said, we'll come tomorrow to help you sow the seeds. And to our shock, the next morning we found that the seeds were gone. And when we asked him, he said, I had not eaten food in a week, and so I ate the seeds. And I saw such abject poverty, and this one incident had such a deep impact on my mind. And I said, whenever opportunity allows, I have to connect with rural India, because sitting in our cities, we are so cocooned and so divested from the problems that rural India faces. That even these small problems that we face in urban India, and which causes so much of irritation and anguish. I wish people in cities visit once to rural areas to see what kind of lives do they lead. So I would say this was the early experiences that shaped whatever I became in later life.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to touch upon that later, because the later part of your life is completely connected to developing and acting on that social conscience. But I think anything on your life would be incomplete if we don't focus on the one entity who's had a larger than life impact, and which is your father. And we were so impressed with some of the anecdotes that you told us during his journey. I think he's been at the top of business, down to the bottom, again back to the top of business. It's almost anti-fragile, right? Nothing could kind of shake him
Yeah,
off. And I'd like you to narrate that incident about when he went to Japan for the first
yeah,
time and how he convinced.
yeah,
So that was something that really left an impression on my mind. So tell us a few anecdotes about your father and his journey.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Uh, so as I said, in 1949 he set up that radio factory. Unfortunately, a couple of years later there was a major fire and got burned down. In those days, insurance was not so well developed, so he had lost whatever he had earned, and then he got this opportunity. Never say die attitude came down to Bombay, and then I told you that he had got into the component business, and also for the radio he needed components. So he decided to go and visit Panasonic. At that time, the company was called Matsushita, and he went to Osaka at their head office without any appointment. Those days, neither there was internet nor there was a mobile phone, and getting an international call was next to impossible. So he went there and he went to the reception, and he said, "I want to meet your export manager." And they said, "Well, sir, you don't have an appointment." So he said, "Well, I'm here, and you can now give me an appointment." And she politely said no. And so he was a man of determination. He said, I'm not going back till I see this gentleman. So he would go every day, sit over there for 6 months. He sat in the reception. He hired an apartment to stay over there. And finally, taking pity on him, the receptionist arranged the meeting with the export manager. And then he went and told him that, why did you take so long to meet me? I was not coming to sell you something. I was going to buy something from you. So you at least lost a customer for 6 months of a potential sale. Don't you think you did something wrong? So anyway, they got into a conversation, and he gave his list of requirements. And he said, you don't have any business in India. I'm opening up a new market for you. And I'm willing to meet your quantity budgets, whatever you want to sell. But India is a very price sensitive market, so pricing um, I will make the offer, and you give me your ask about how much you want to sell in the country in the first year. So then they gave a number, and he said, "Yeah, that's fine. I will sell." And the price they gave, he said, "No, this is not acceptable. I need half the price." And that conversation went on for another few days, but ultimately they relented and they gave him the price that he desired, and then he never looked back. So he brought down the cost of his own manufacture for the radios, and of course we also sold in the rest of the country. And then at that time, Mr. Konosuke Matsushita, who was the founder, of the group. He is even today revered as one of the finest businessmen that Japan has produced. And he started a foundation called PHP Institute, which stands for Peace and Happiness Through Prosperity. And my father brought that book and gave it to me to read, which again had a very deep impact on me because he said that wealth creation is not a crime, it is a must, because the world's scarce resources should be put in the hands of those who can optimize and maximize the returns. Because without wealth creation, you cannot solve the world's problems with good words alone. You need wealth to solve those problems. He said the issue is what do you do with the wealth that you create? It is in the distribution of that wealth. That if you use that wealth for the benefit of society at large, rather than wasting it on yourself, then that is a true businessman, a true industrialist. And um, I started practicing this from the time I read that book. I said I'm going to follow this example of Mr. Matsushita. So there were so many incidents, from his life. He was very fond of meeting all the scientists across the country and giving them free samples and technical notes, which were very, very difficult to get. And so he endeared himself to the entire scientific community. And there was at Siri Pilani one Professor Amarjit Singh, and he had developed the black and white TV technology. Uh, and the country was going to start the black and white TV industry with imports. And so this professor called up my father and said, "Oh, only you can convince the prime minister to not allow foreign technology," which my father successfully did. And um, Siri Pilani's technology was adopted, and the first license was issued to him in 67. Unfortunately, there was a jealousy among the partners who were the original founders, etc. And there were court cases, and so we were back to square one with all the assets frozen because he never kept a penny outside. Everything was reinvested into the same company. But 2 3 years later, we won the case. They acquired the company from us, sold it to Sarabhai's, and after being the third largest company in 3 years, the company had shut down. But life had better things in store for him. In 1970, Ericsson, which is the world's largest and now about a 140-year-old company, had been in India for 15 years. And this incident is in 1970. The country head went to the Director General of Post and Telegraph, which then became the Ministry of Communications, and said, I have orders from my head office to wind up shop and go back home because in 15 years we haven't done a penny's business. So Mr. Agarwal was then the DGPNT, and he told him, my advice to you is, since you have invested 15 years, stay on for another 2 3 years, but keep an Indian partner, because that time the only customer was the government of India. The rules and processes and licensing was very, very complex. So he said, you need to have a good partner to navigate you through the Indian system of procurement. So he got clearance, and then he asked this Mr. Agarwal to recommend some names. And he said, I can introduce you to a very prominent industrialist, or I can introduce you to a very hardworking and honest businessman, which was my father. So they said, let us try with him. If we don't like him, then we'll go to this industrialist. So he gets a call, and they say, this is the objective of our conversation, and would you like to get into the telecom business? He said, sure, why not? So a meeting was fixed with the president in Sweden, and off he goes there. And in the middle of the interview, the president asked him, what is your net worth? So he gave some figure, and he said, no, Mr. Jiwarajka, I think you're making a mistake because we've done a due diligence on you, and the figure is 10x of what you are saying. So my father replied, that might be my market worthiness, but if I have to give you a net worth is what appears in my books of accounts. So they were so taken in by his honesty that within that first meeting, they decided to convert their 100% branch into a joint venture and made my father the chairman and managing director. And that company continues till today, where I succeeded my father as the chairman and managing director of the company. And we played such a significant role. Within 2 years, Ericsson received their first order in Idgah at Delhi, a 30,000 line exchange. And we saw the entire evolution from Strowger exchanges to the manual, analog, digital, and ultimately mobile telephony, the international gateways, the national gateways, the whole introduction of the electronic phones, the push button phones, etc. And my father never went, he never made notes, he never used a calculator. He was brilliant at doing mental calculations. So he would go to Sweden every 3 months and sit in front of 15 guys heading different verticals, and he would answer all of them. Complicated, top class engineering kind of conversations, and an uneducated man sits there and with all the confidence answers them, convinces them. And he built a reputation that the president told all the vice presidents that when Mr. Jivrajka comes, even if you have made notes and if Mr. Jivrajka is contradicting them, I will believe him rather than believing you.
Wow.
So, and that word spread, so he became an advisor to Philips in Holland and to Telefunken in Germany, and they would, in those days, send a private jet to take him for meetings in Europe. So, such a broad-minded person, such an affable man, great humility, and daring to dream big. These were qualities that I learned from him from a very early childhood. So I was like his assistant at home. One important task was to dial phones for him, phone calls for him. We had that rotary dial, and making one call would take 15 minutes, and there would be cross connection. And eh, so I would be sitting next to him and hearing his conversations. And then those days, all communication was by correspondence. So he would tell me the broad points and say, "You write on my behalf." So I started doing business correspondence from the age of 11 on behalf of my father. And then, when we're having business discussions, he'd call me and say, "Acha, what is your view on this?" And others would say, "Well, he's a kid. What are you asking him?" He said, "But so what? He can have a view. No, let us listen to young people might bring some fresh ideas." And right till the very end, till he died, he used to tell me, uh, listen to your children. And then when I had grandchildren, he said, start talking to your grandchildren. They will start teaching you, and which they do. So there were so many incidents like this um, in his life. I mean, I can go on forever, talking about. But there was a lot of learning. He was a great man. People in politics, bureaucracy, government, right up to the president, all the senior ministers used to come home to seek his wise counsel.
Sushil, I can hear the pride and gratitude which comes out of your voice, and I think it's very difficult to learn how do you balance between social and capitalistic endeavors, because you could be either one side or the other. But creating that beautiful balance is so critical if you want to impact all sides. And I can hear that gratitude. But I want to switch to your life.
Right.
And we figured out that your life can be split into three broad periods. And each had a different focus and very differing outcomes, extremely differing outcomes. I mean, it's as if you were running three pieces one after the other, which trying to get together somewhere, or it's getting now.
Yeah.
So your years 20 to 40 was all about setting up and growing your family business.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about that, and how did that help you in the endeavors that you are pursuing further down in your life now? How did they connect? And was that a planned piece, or it's just unfolding?
Well, to a great extent, it unfolded because, as I told you, 1970, this joint venture with Ericsson took place, the world's largest telecom company. And radio was a very, very important means of communication. And then television came along, and there was a huge energy shortage in the country. Um, so the batteries, tri-cell batteries, were even at that time in acute shortage and were part of the Essential Commodities Act. There was one brand called Eveready in the east, and there was a brand called Jeep in the north. So there were no battery plants in the west and in the south, and these two regions faced acute shortage. And so the then industry minister requested my father if we could bring some world-class technology and put up plants in the west and in the south. So Mr. Lakhanpal of Murphy Radios and my father went to Japan, and my father had a partner, Mr. Reddy from the south, and so Panasonic agreed to set up two joint ventures, one in Baroda called Novino Batteries, and ours was set up in Nellore in Andhra Pradesh because the industry minister was from Nellore. He said, "I'll give you license if you put it in my district." So with little choice at that time, uh, we agreed to put it up there, and our brand was Nippo. And we wanted to bring in world-class technologies at affordable prices to Indian consumers who were till then being dished out very poor quality products. The batteries were paper clad. They used to leak, if you recall, and people used to sell half-used batteries. Uh, so we introduced metal clad batteries with tamper-proof seals at a 10% higher price and with a Panasonic brand to tout, and went into the market. And to our surprise, uh, the sales were very low. We could hardly reach 10% of the capacity. And we started trying to find out what were the reasons. So one retailer in a village, we learnt a lot from him. He said, "See, sir, my grandfather used to sell Billy Chap batteries because that was a symbol of Eveready, a nine with a black cat going through.
Yeah.
So it was not known as Eveready battery, it was known as Billy Chap." तो इस मेरे दादाजी ने बिल्ली छाप बेचा, मेरे पिताजी ने बिल्ली छाप बेचा, मैं भी अभी तक बिल्ली छाप बेच रहा हूँ। कस्टमर आके बिल्ली छाप मांगता है। अब आप बोल रहे हैं कि इसका डबल पावर है, ये है, वो है। तो इतना छोटा चीज़ के लिए वो आता है हमारे पास में, 10 सेकंड में उसको बैटरी नहीं देते हैं तो दूसरा दुकान में चला जाता है। तो हम इसको कैसे सिखाएंगे इसके बारे में? तो हम आपका बैटरी नहीं बेचेंगे। So that gave us the sense that unless we start with paper clad batteries of a higher quality and cheaper than the existing brands, they're not going to get an entry. So we spoke to Panasonic, they pulled out old drawings, they recalled retired engineers, and we set up a paper clad battery plant at a 10% lower price. And then we got an entry and we never looked back. And gradually the awareness was built about metal clad, leak proof, tamper proof batteries. So even at that time, I mean, many of his friends had invested money. We went and did a public issue. Those days, there were hardly 250 companies which were public, and the share price had tanked to 2 rupees. And many of these early investors decided to sell out, and my father borrowed monies and bought back all these shares. But after that initial 5 years period, uh, never looked back. It was the fastest growing, most profitable company, and the share price rocketed. Until today is the second largest battery company in India, one of the most profitable companies. And then in 75, uh, we launched Dianora TV,
Ah,
and in black and white. And here again, those days the components manufactured in India were of very poor quality. Imports was not allowed. So we again went to Japan, spoke to Panasonic, did a joint collaboration, technical collaboration to start making the components which were of very poor quality, deflection components, tuners, and speakers, and all that. And we pioneered a lot of new technologies. For example, the first flow soldering machine in India was imported by us. The first LEDs in televisions were introduced by us, and so on and so forth. Distortion-free speakers being introduced, um, and so it became the hottest selling brand all the way up to 89, 1989. In 82, the Asian Games color television was introduced, and
yeah.
again the demand, some 80,000 SKD units were imported from Germany and Japan, and those were dished out. But hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
But
Yes, we can.
we continue to be
We can hear you.
the largest selling brand in the country right up to 1989. And so we did a lot of import substitution, um, developed a whole range of suppliers, and I was given the part of that task of import substitution. So in the batteries, most of the suppliers that I developed were in Bombay, and I spent hours and days visiting them, whether it was plastic components or metal components or uh, liquid chemicals, etc. And um, I succeeded in not only uh, bringing down the cost and localization. Um, that was a matter of great pride for me. I'll just tell you one incident. We had gone into making carbon rods, and there's a baking oven which is very long, and there's a steel belt which wears out over a period of time. And so the next one that had to be bought, it costed 65 lakhs in those days, in the 90s. It was a lot of money. And somehow I was not convinced, how can a steel belt cost that kind of money? So I put my purchase guy to go into the market and find out. And we were able to get an Indian substitute at 6.5 lakhs. And
Oh,
we spoke to the Japanese R&D guy. He said, no, 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 you don't understand. This has to be world class and blah, blah, blah. I said, yeah, I agree with you, but what is the harm in trying out? And somehow I convinced him to do a trial, and he got convinced that this can work. So we brought down the cost of that by
oh,
90%, and that was a permanent saving.
wow.
And I mean, I'll need few sessions to talk about just that chapter of my life when I was doing import substitution. And so that was my first phase of mentoring young entrepreneurs, people who didn't have licenses, hardly had any money. We encouraged them, gave them advances, gave them orders, helped them to get their bank loans in place, and helped them also with the technology. And so from that period, my this urge to help young entrepreneurs continued till this date. And then I
Mm.
was handling finance for a long time, and at the age of 26, I was appointed advisor to the Bank of Tokyo in India, which was then the world's largest bank. And I was definitely the youngest advisor to any bank. Anyway, you don't become an advisor at 26. You can become at 62, but not the other way around. So I played a key role for 15 years. I literally ran the bank and helped a lot of industrialists with their financing requirements. I did a lot of unique things, got them funding, got them customers, solved the HR problems. So, I mean, I developed a reputation that this guy can fix any problems. And in those days, the big bankers were State Bank and IDBI, ICICI Bank. Uh, and imagine at that young age, I became friends with the chairman of State Bank, with the chairman of IDBI, with the chairman of ICICI Bank, to an extent that they would call me if I didn't go more than once a week. They would say, "Arey Sushil, tum aaye nahi." I said, "Sir, you're a big man. How can I come?" But they would encourage me to come, and they would discuss various issues relating to the battery and TV industry.
Mm.
So that was again, a very beautiful period where we were experiencing high growth. I was learning new things and being able to help out, etc. Uh, so I would say from the age of 20 to 40, this was probably the golden period of our life. Everything went right. We didn't see any downfalls. After that was a period of going through great difficulties.
Turbulence.
Yeah.
So let's do a quick time check. I think we've got about 20 minutes before we have to open for. So and
Yeah.
let's quickly look at that. So Sangram, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think from building your own to and solving problems for your own business, family business, to then solving problems for the industry, I think that was where you kind of stepped back from playing an active role in your own business, and you took on the mantle of helping the industry per se by becoming the chairman of FICCI, which you held on for the next 15 years. And you solved several issues ranging from, completely revamping the operations of the airport, to championing the film industry, to championing the design industry. Very quickly, could you take us through your journey at FICCI and the challenges that you overtook there?
Yeah, so it was in 1999 my father encouraged me that I should join FICCI and help the ex-past President Mr. Kanti Kumar Poddar in setting up a Western regional office. I had no idea what the chamber does and how does it function, etc. But my father said, so I joined. But I quickly realized that it is not the same cup of tea, and I was thrown deep and thick into it because in 2000, the first ever presidential visit of Bill Clinton to Bombay at the Bombay Stock Exchange had got fixed, and it was a major uh, event to organize a presidential visit. And Mr. Poddar had fallen ill, and he asked me if I could assist. Then Dr. Mitra, who was the Secretary General and is now the Finance Minister of West Bengal, so he came down, and after a initial familiarization period, we got along very well, and I solved multiple challenges that came our way, and ultimately it was a flawless event that went through. And then they made me the chairman of the Western region, and I drew a 5-year plan, starting with the modernization of the Mumbai airport. And I said, the liberalization policy had kicked in, and the focus had moved from getting licenses in Delhi to raising money and doing international trade. Uh, and that was focused in Mumbai with the trade commissioners and the consul generals. So I did a checklist of which were the sectors that had not yet been touched by any chamber, and I realized the entertainment sector, for example, largest producer of film, second largest in uh, TV software, but nowhere on the international scene, less than 1% of the international volume. So we decided to professionalize the industry. We got them industry status. We got them funding. Till that time, they were being funded by uh, Underworld and at very high rates of interest, 40, 50% interest. So we got IDBI to set up a 100 crore fund and Bank of India to set up a 50 crore fund. We got them the industry status. And then we devised an event called Frames, which is an acronym for Films, Radio, Audio, Music, Events, and Shows. And that has become the largest event in Asia. And that set the ball rolling
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the corporatization and the modernization of the entertainment sector in abroad. The whole FM policy and the right up to the new OTT platforms, entry of people like Disney and Bertelsmann and Sony Pictures were all organized at these events. So this was one. The other sectors that I worked on were nutraceuticals, technical textiles, biofuels, medical tourism, marriage tourism, uh, brand protection, and these were things which had not been touched. And right from a very nascent stage, we did tremendous amount of workshops. We did for example, grapes to wine policy. I brought in experts from France, translated into Marathi. We would get 500 farmers together, teach them what kind of grapes they need to grow and how they should store it. And then, it
Wow.
became the wine country of India. Similarly, we did a lot of pioneering work. I created the Pune Design Forum in Pune. There were a lot of NID kids who had set up mom and pop shops. Uh, Very creative guys. Many of them were colleagues and didn't know that they all existed out there. So I brought all of them onto a single platform, created a brand, and that led to explosive growth for that sector in Pune. So I mean, those 16 years that I spent at FICCI, literally, uh, I had given up business and I was spending all my time. And in the midst of that,
Growing
I
the
was also appointed president of All India Organization of Employers, International Chamber of Commerce, and Indo-Arab Chamber, Infrastructure and Logistics Federation. So it gave me exposure to different dimensions, from handling labor issues to handling international trade and commerce issues to bilateral between the Arab world and India, and then looking at the infrastructure sector over a period of time broadened my horizons, my knowledge, and my connectivity. And therefore, I feel those 16 years were my true education rather than the first 16 years of my life, where uh, when people ask me, I say I'm basically an uneducated guy, and I
Mm.
keep learning because I'm now a student for life. So I learn from everybody that I come across. I keep updating my knowledge.
Yeah, I know Sushil has on his cell phone some of the most powerful people, personal phone. And I've seen him talking to some of those guys, which I can't talk about, but I know. So, Sushil, how come from a point where you left business and then you came to supporting the industry and the country during the most crucial time, right? There's a time when the country had become liberalized. It was less about license, it was more about how do you get businesses and industries working. How come from there OMC happened? So, you embarked upon the path of making Indian villages solar powered. And I know you have very, very poignant stories about why you thought it was necessary to do that. And not only that, I mean, so at the end of it today, you have 6 major global awards, including the Rockefeller. Uh, but why did you? Take us through the story. How did it click? How did it happen? How did you suddenly leave Fiki and you said, "Okay, time up. I have to do something more." How did it happen?
And so I was seeing that, environment was getting polluted, uh, energy was becoming a huge problem, uh, carbonization of the environment was taking place, and globally, the discussion about how do we control this environmental disaster had started taking place. People had started talking about wind energy and solar energy, etc., but they were still at a very nascent stage. And there were two of my colleagues from Ericsson whom I encouraged to leave their jobs and become entrepreneurs. And we started a new company, and we were trying to figure out what should we do. And so we went to Airtel and asked them what is their biggest pain point. And they said it was the diesel consumption at the telecom towers. The 500,000 towers, they were consuming 2 billion liters of diesel annually. 30% used to be stolen. There were diesel mafia all over the country, and it was leading to an environmental disaster. The government was also nudging the sector to go green. So we decided to replace these DG sets with solar power and battery storage. It initially began with that idea, but when we started designing the system, we said if we are going to supply to the telecom towers and they are all existent in the villages, why not create additional capacity to supply to commercial shops and establishments and also to every household in the village. So as that idea germinated, we re-engineered the whole product and design, and it started taking shape. And what made me convinced that we were on the right path was when we were going to inaugurate the first plant. We stopped at a tea shop, and I heard a child crying, pitch dark. The only source of light was the headlights of our Jeep. And on inquiring, we were told that the mother was not able to find the milk for the child, and therefore he was crying. So we took our Jeep and put the headlights towards her house, and then we went in to talk to her and asked her, how has she been living her life in absolute darkness? And she said, you people living in cities, how will you understand our issues? My first child died because accidentally in the darkness, I gave my child rat poison thinking it was milk. And I was so shocked by listening to this. And we said, it did leave a deep imprint in my mind that we are so divorced from the problems that rural India is facing. Imagine living after 70 years of independence in abject darkness and poverty. And then when we went further to our first plant and I was speaking to the construction workers, they told me that 20, 30 snakes you will come across. And generally in the fields, because the harvest is quite tall, at night when the farmer is coming back, accidentally steps onto a snake and he gets bitten by the snake. And before he gets help, he dies because people will come only by the next morning. And I thought, how much impact it can make, how many lives can be saved if there was electricity. And then 1 week later, after we had inaugurated the plant, uh, I went to do a survey and came across a lady. She she took off her ghungat and put her face towards the wall, but she had the courage to tell me what problem she faced. So she said, "See, in this small floor space that I have in this mud house, 8 of us sleep on the floor. Yeah, and we don't know whether snakes will come, rats, lizards, all kinds of insects. And in that darkness, you don't know who is sleeping over whom, accidentally, because there's hardly any space. You might just be on top of somebody. Now, I mean, such challenges that she said, I hardly sleep. I very rarely slept at night. And again, I realized, if there were street lights, if there was some ambient light, it would make their life so much easier. We saw that mobile phones had reached every single villager, but they didn't have uh, power to charge those mobile phones. So somebody would collect them, go to a district headquarters. So looking at all that, I realized that we were on the right path, and so it took us a 10-year journey to go on improving the efficiency of the whole system, bringing down costs. Uh, we introduced, for example, innovative financial packages for the villagers to buy electricity. We started selling them in sachets. 5 rupees a day, you will get two LED lights, one wall-mounted fan, and a mobile charging plug point. And you get it for 6 hours, and it is controlled by smart controllers on the poles called load limiters. And
Wow.
so, because we found in the village, even paying 150 rupees at one shot, they could not afford. So they would pay 5 rupees, they would earn 20, 30 rupees during the day, and again supplemented by another 5 rupees. Or if we didn't have, they wouldn't take power for a few days. And we started seeing the transformation. Honey processing units came up, ready-made garment units started coming up, a university came up, the banks, schools which had all shut down, they started functioning, petrol pumps started functioning, and the economic activity and the social activity that it generated was humongous. So it was not only powering the unpowered, it was empowering the unpowered. And that became the theme of the ebook that I wrote. And I'll be happy to share that link with all those who are on this show tonight. And it has been a matter of great satisfaction. They widened my vision to say now that we have the three basic pillars of telecom, electricity, and Wi-Fi, we can provide a range of e-services, e-education, e-entertainment, e-governance to the masses, and relieve them of this massive problem, and really democratize all these services which were divorced from this vast population, and give them world-class services at their doorstep at prices that they could afford. So we got the first, in 2014, we got the World Economic Forum Award for Global Tech Pioneer, and then followed by the Climate Group Award from Netherlands, followed by the Platts Global Energy Award from New York, and the Economist writing a whole page article on us, and Financial Times. And we became the darling of the international media. We got supported by Rockefeller Foundation, USAID, World Bank, and all the investors came from across the globe. And we set up a world-class company right from day one, as if we were a multinational, and a world-class management team, systems and processes. So all the learnings what we had from Panasonic and Ericsson, etc., and rural marketing of Nippo batteries, and the prepaid SIM card packages that we had made. We put all those learnings into this one project, and we would have never succeeded if we didn't have the backgrounds which had nothing to do with power, but more from telecom and uh, batteries and doing innovative marketing. So that has been, I thought, my contribution to saving the planet, saving the environment. COP21 had passed resolutions, International Solar Alliance had got set up, and the SDG goals had been set up. And I said, this can be my small contribution. We can create a sustainable model which can be replicated all over the world to bring affordable, clean power to hundreds of millions of people who live in rural areas and have been deprived of getting world-class services. So the benefits of economic liberalization had not reached, it had not percolated down to the last mile. And I thought that by doing this, I can create a model for others to replicate and take it worldwide.
And from there, I think the tradition of doing something for the society continues even as you go to the next phase of your life. And what I found unique was, when people celebrate milestone birthdays, we do big things for milestone birthdays, right? We go abroad, we host destination parties, but you did something which was classically in line with what your true nature is, possibly inspired by your father. So we started this episode with your birthday, 60th birthday resolution, and what you decided to do over there. And I love that you should inspire all of us who actually have, all of us have milestone birthdays in our lives, and you milestone birthdays should be all about. So tell us about that.
Yeah,
And maybe we should also add, because there's a question which has come from, which had come in. If you can also summarize what are the lessons that you have garnered from your life, and what is that would you like to pass on? So if you can keep both, if you touch both.
I'll try to keep it as short as possible.
No, don't keep it short, but touch both.
It began a few months before my 60th birthday, and everyone was clamoring that you need to have a big theme party and blah, blah, blah. And somewhere deep down in my mind, I was not convinced, what are we celebrating? That we have entered the sunset period of our lives. That's not a reason to celebrate, right? And society has given us so much. I've seen from my childhood to where I had reached. We had all the comforts that material world could offer, and now it was payback time to the community. And so after a lot of thought, one day I got up early in the morning and I wrote down an email which I sent to 600 people, because everyone said theme. So I said, yes, I will keep it as a theme based on 660, 600, 6,000, etc., etc. And I said, I will celebrate my 60th birthday by adopting these 6 themes. So it was about adopting orphaned girls from the poorest slums, 60 of them, doing 600 cataract surgeries because India has the highest number of blindness. Swachh Bharat Abhiyan was announced later, but I decided that this is a major challenge why rural girls don't go to school, because there are no toilets separately for the girl child. So I said I'll build 600 toilets. Then we were destroying the environment, so I said I'll plant trees. We'll plant 6,000 trees, and I'll start spending 60% of my time on not-for-profit, and I will reduce my wardrobe by 60%, so that from vanity I can come back into sanity, and reduce my ego. And I asked people for their reaction, what they thought about it. And to my amazement, I got so many feedbacks, and some of them who were much older than me, and they said, we feel ashamed of ourselves at the way we have celebrated, and we promise you that on our 70th, on our 75th, we'll do exactly what you did multiplied by 70 or 75. I don't want to take names, but they're some of the biggest guys in the country who wrote back. And even globally, I got such phenomenal feedback that I knew that, number one, that I'm on the right path. Number two is that I've made a public commitment. So I can't just write some fancy letter and then forget about it.
Ah.
And, so I even wrote to them that 1 year later, I will give you a report card of what I've achieved and how I've achieved. Within 1 month, I had no clue. I've never made toilets in my life. I didn't know how to adopt orphan girls, stuff like that. Where do I go and plant trees? I've never planted a tree in my life. But everything fell into place within 1 month. Nature conspired to put the right kind of people in front of me. And I said, rather than creating my own foundation and starting from scratch, these were already established NGOs with all the approvals, etc., and an organization to boot. I said, let me support them to scale. So I met one Mr. Nirbhay Jain, who's 90 years old, and he was running an NGO in Panvel, and he had built some 100 toilets. So I said, I'm willing to join and help you to scale. So I made a whole plan, 5 years of building 10,000 toilets. And then vocational training for the women, creating self-help groups, etc., etc. And I was on the board of an eye hospital, Aditya Jodh, and Dr. Natarajan was a good friend. So I started supporting his NGO to do the cataract surgeries. And my wife was heading Maharashtra State Women's Council, which were running 10 projects for women, right from the girl child to rape child rehabilitation, old age homes. And I gave them the assignment of locating these 60 girls. They shortlisted some 200. Out of that, we selected 60. They had to be from the poorest families, and then we said we'll support them for life in their funding. And then I came across Mayank Gandhi, who was a social activist and then a political leader, and I believe he was a speaker at.
It was
That's right.
a session.
We hosted him.
Yeah, and so he one day met me and he said, this is my vision and this is my idea. And I said, look at this, I thought of planting trees, and here is a man saying, I want to plant millions of fruit trees. So I said, I'm going to support you fully. And I was so convinced that this one project can transform the country and bridge the divide between urban and rural, between the food growers and the food consumers, that I went head on along with them, set up a advisory board. I brought in nearly 40 top corporates from across India. We brought in technology from Israel, and we succeeded in increasing farmer income by nearly 10 to 30 times. And I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that this one project is going to play a very pivotal role in the transformation of India and Indian economy and the rural folk of this country. So this is a very satisfying journey, and it is a natural progression after having built industries and then doing work for the nation, and then learn all those learnings. You incorporate into the social causes and help them to scale not only to a national level but to a global level. So this has been a very satisfying part of the journey. And then technology has become so important in our lives. The world is going digital, and if we don't do adoption, many of our industries and jobs are going to vanish at a pace which is so rapid that they will not even imagine. Therefore, passing on the message about going to digital technology, I started mentoring young entrepreneurs in disruptive technologies, and that is one is Alok's company, and Alok is as young as anyone can be. So, and it gives me immense pleasure. Of course, I'm learning. It keeps me young. It keeps me abreast with what is happening in technology development worldwide, and then I use that knowledge to disseminate it amongst a much wider audience that I've had the privilege of meeting through all these networks. So to me, all these have been platforms not for self pride, but as a means of reaching out to millions of people and giving service back to them, bringing joy into their lives. So this has been a very satisfying
Absolutely.
part of my life.
Brilliant. I
Uh,
think
you said about the second part is what lessons have I learned through this whole journey. So this morning I sat down and made a list of it, and it was quite exhaustive, so I'm going to read them out.
yes.
And the first is uh, education is not equal to knowledge, and knowledge is not equal to wisdom. Some of the world's most wise men had no formal education. So education is not only in books. You can learn from nature, you can learn from other people, you can learn from birds, animals. Everything in the environment that God created can teach you. You can learn from the sun, from the moon, right? But we try to think that whatever we have mugged up in our childhood and that bookish knowledge makes us wise. I have seen people with the best education in the world and being disasters in their enterprises, and conversely people who did very badly in their academic life being highly successful entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
Second thing, I realized the importance of EQ, the emotional quotient. Harvard did a study over 50 years and found that those with very high IQ and low EQ, they were disasters in the businesses that they led. And conversely, people with average IQ and very high EQ have been the most successful people, whether they were in business or in any other leadership role. So develop a high EQ. the emotional quotient. And that comes with empathy. The world is divided between those who are having either apathy or sympathy. But if we move towards empathy, then we will find sustainable solutions to solving the world's problems. Then be adaptable, nimble, and swift, because the pace of change has accelerated to a level which we cannot understand. What used to take 30, 40 years to change is changing in 3, 4 months. And so, if we are not swift, if we are not nimble, if we are not willing to adapt new technologies, we will be left by the wayside. Then dream big, take risks. Small companies are perishing. Dhirubhai Ambani, Narendra Modi, uh, college dropouts like Bill Gates are examples. They dreamt big and they achieved because they had the courage to dream big and take risks. That is the first quality of an entrepreneur. Then develop friendship with people who you consider to be better and wiser human beings than yourself, because they will become your permanent learning ground. When you surround yourself with people with high positive energy, they will uplift your life as well. Remain a student all your life, because life teaches you more than books. I already told you about it. Remain grounded and sensitive to the less privileged. You know, However high we might go, we have to become more and more humble and very sensitive to uh, meeting the needs of the underprivileged in society. Then the current mantra is collaboration. So many people who are in competing industries are today collaborating to get onto an even larger platform, right? And this is happening across the world. If you look at 5G technology, all competitors have found one association, they're forming common standards, and this is happening across all technology. No one company by themselves can create the technologies of the future. Then embrace technology and go digital. I already spoke about this. Uh, don't destroy nature. If you look what we have done in this mad greed for consuming more, we built a wrong model of measuring success on quarterly results of achieving higher production and higher profitability, and that has led to a mad or excessive consumption of everything. You need 4 clothes, you will buy 40 clothes. You need to have X amount of food, you will consume 10x, and then you'll get diabetes, and then you'll consume excessive medicine. So it's a virtual cycle of pandering to your greed and not to your need. And uh, therefore, we need to get reconnected with nature. And we can't keep this liability only on government. I think government, civil society, and NGOs need to work in a collaborative manner to reconnect with nature, whether it is uh, food, food wastage, water, electricity, etc. And the recent pandemic is a classic example of what can happen. You look worldwide at the disasters, forest fires, volcano eruptions, tsunamis. I mean, you can see natural disasters destroying complete regions, and soon they will be destroying countries. Global warming, glaciers are melting at a pace which is unbelievable. Uh, Madras just last week has declared themselves as the first city in India which has zero groundwater, and many other cities in India are racing towards that. In UP, they are at alarming levels. Government has banned the drawing of groundwater, and because water is available to us for nearly free, we don't value it, and therefore we go on wasting water. Uh, CSR became a buzzword, corporate social responsibility. I personally believe that unless it becomes a part of your DNA and you adopt personal social responsibility, how do you bring about these changes in your own life? And unless every citizen of the country starts adopting it, you will never bring about change. A few listed companies, doing 2% CSR is not going to change this country. It has to go on to a much wider platform. Then, engage with people not on their masks. He is chairman, he is this, he is that. We tend to tailor our communication based on what mask he's wearing. Engage with them at a human level, and you will find that you have very beautiful relationships, and that you'll suddenly find you've got thousands of people as friends in your network from all walks of life. Wealth creation is good, but it is the distribution that matters. What we learned from Konosuke Matsushita. Help people every day without any expectations. I experimented with this over the last 30 years. I made a target at least one person to be helped without any expectation. And trust me, nature has a way of rewarding you with a multiplier from somewhere else, not necessarily from the same incident or from the same person. But it is a, you cannot imagine, the multiplier could even be 100x. So I would encourage all those who are listening, try this experiment for 100 days, it will change your life. And the new buzzword, who will be the new wealth creators, are those who are adapting ESG, environment, society, and governance. You know, uh, that brings me that, uh, to say that it is good business to do good. Right? It is no longer some social responsibility that you. Companies who have adopted ESG are getting the highest premium in the stock markets. They are getting access to the cheapest fund and to unlimited source of funds. There are $500 billion worth of SPACs with ESG companies, and they are still trying to look for companies who can absorb that kind of money. So in the future, if you don't have ESG as part of your strategy, be sure you will neither get money nor recognition nor fame. So they will become the new wealth creators. So with that, I tried to summarize some of the lessons that I learned. And you had mentioned in the beginning, Alok, about my influence of music. So from a very early age, I have been very influenced by Indian film music. In those days, there were a lot of motivational songs. And so, as a teenager, there were three songs that struck me, and which I adopted as my philosophies of life. The first one was, मैं जिंदगी का साथ निभाता गया हर फिक्र को धुएं में उड़ाता चला गया. And if you read the rest of it also is very beautiful. Adopt it in your life. मैं जिंदगी का साथ निभा, make life as your companion. Then the second one was that famous Raj Kapoor song, किसी की मुस्कुराहटों पे हो निसार, किसी का दर्द मिल सके तो ले उधार, किसी के वास्ते हो तेरे दिल में प्यार, जीना इसी का नाम. So I think it can aptly summarize what I have tried to do through all these brilliant journeys that I've had. One bhajan called हमको मन की शक्ति देना, मन विजय करे, दूसरों की जय से पहले खुद को जय करे. So if you don't have self-respect, if you don't have self-pride, if you don't believe in your own nation, nobody is going to give it to you. Learn to have self-respect. And you'll have self-respect when you do all these things that I narrated about. Then self-respect will come naturally to you. And the last song of late, because of the environmental disaster of Michael Jackson, Heal the World, Make It a Better Place for you and for me and the entire human race. There are people dying there. If you care enough for the living, make it a better place. Phenomenal song. This is what the world needs today. You need healing. You want the pandemic to go away. It's not going to go away by vaccination, etc. If we do not do a course correction of the disasters that we have been putting on nature, nature is getting back to you with a vengeance. It can only reverse when you start respecting nature. Then nature will start respecting. So in this whole journey, There were several brilliant people who came in my journey, and I want to name a few of them. Mr. Vallabh Bansali of Inam, being in the stock markets, dealing with money, but he has led such a fabulous life and is doing tremendous work in various areas of healthcare, education, nation building, building value systems, and gave up all that at the peak of his career and all that wealth that was generated. It's very difficult to give it up, when you're in the midst of money. It's like, if you're in Las Vegas and you're earning a lot of money, it's very difficult to give that up. It's addictive. Uh, Mr. D. Shivanandan was a former police commissioner and DG Police of Maharashtra. He set up Roti Bank to collect surplus food and distribute it among the needy. There are 200 million people who sleep every day without food, and 400 million meals are wasted every day. If you can bridge that gap, I became a co trustee with him, and under his able guidance and vision, we started the 100 meals a day. We've reached 40,000 meals per day to the poorest and needy sections of society. We did 5 million meals last year. We've already spread to 8 cities, and our target is that in 10 years we should be covering practically the whole of India. And we are not doing it by ourselves. We are encouraging local people who have the same passion, the same vision, to become local leaders. And we become the catalyst for giving them a model which they can then adapt. I met Mr. Nirbhay Jain, I told you, the 90-year-old man on women empowerment. Mayank Gandhi, I already spoke about. Uh, I met with two very fine bankers, Mr. Amiya Bose, who was the deputy managing director of State Bank. And if you talk to any state banker, they will say he was a legend. And from the age of 20, he started treating me like a friend and a confidant. Unless I saw him 2, 3 times a week, he would get upset. Great banker, and taught me a lot about banking, finance, transparency, honesty. Uh, Mr. B. Ratnakar, who became the youngest chairman of a PSU, which was Canara Bank, and built it to become the third largest bank. He was a phenomenal guy, and I tell you, I learned so many management lessons from him. We became closest friends, right from when he was a branch manager till he became chairman, we were close friends, and even beyond that. And I told you about Mr. Konosuke Matsushita and his book on PHP. And then I have been deeply influenced by the model of the Tata Group, you know, because they have truly practiced over a century of how you act as a trustee of the wealth that you earn, and again use it for the collective good of society. So I think I've tried to summarize all my learnings, my influences in life, and I can only say that I'm indebted to all these people who came in my life and taught me so many things. I was like Eklavya, absorbing from all of them. Whether they accepted me as their student, as their disciple or not, I accepted all of them as my gurus. And so I have to give credit to all of them for whatever I am, in all humility. So let me end here. If there are some questions, I'll answer.
I think you've all given us life
Well,
goals
yeah, we are well over the time.
over time, but I guess I'm just reading the comments that are coming in the chat section. I guess you've done what you've always done, which you've touched our lives in such a beautiful way. I think there's a proud daughter sitting there who said, "So proud of you, Dad," because what a journey. And I think you've given us life goals because I think from chasing success to contributing, and how an ideal life should be lived. I mean, each of the anecdotes that you narrated kind of uh, brings your life philosophy to the fore. And I think the 17 points that you covered are all gems. I'm so glad this entire episode is recorded and it's going to go on YouTube. And we will ensure that it reaches a lot more people who could not attend the session today. Thank you so much, Sushil ji, for having us and giving us so much of guidance. This is definitely not, I'm definitely not going to say a bye, because I am definitely going to pick up your offer of mentorship and come to you, because there is just so much of learning to be taken from you. Alok, any last words?
Yeah, and I think 1.25 hours, and by the way, 5 minutes because of me, is not enough for whatever he talks. And the amount of knowledge, it's an ocean. And I think it's we need far greater amount of time than what we had today. But Sushilji, amazing discussions. I think you leave everyone awe inspired, and I think that's the baton you're handing, or that you're giving to other people to run with. So thank you very much. It has been an amazing session with you.
Thank you, Alok and Sangram, for providing me this platform to share some of my thoughts and experiences with a wider audience. And I hope that they can imbibe some of them, and maybe uh, I will learn some from their own experiences as well. So thank you once again.
Absolutely. So to the viewers, thank you very much for staying with us with this enthralling session. And next Friday, we'll be back again with another story of courage and guts. And this time, it's a very young guest, Garvita Gulati. She's known as the India's Water Girl. And while she's just out of college, she's also on the Forbes 30 and the 30 list. So listen to her. What a 15-year-old child could do on social impact. And she works on water and water conservation and sustainability. Just a 15-year-old when she began. And today she is an ambassador on global platforms. So we will be back next week again. Until that time, a great Independence Day to everyone. And thank you, Sushilji, for being with us in this Independence Day week during this week. So great having you, and goodbye and good night to everyone.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you.
Sushil, good night, folks. See you next week.